Hey guys, Rick Stone here from Our Stoney Acres. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we are going to be covering a March planting guide for those of you that live in zones 5 and 6. I'm excited about March because, number one, the weather is nice. I'm back outside in the garden filming because it's not freezing cold. I don't have to be in the garage anymore. Our weather is actually warming up really nicely. We're going to be in the high 60s for a couple of days before we kind of drop back off and go back into the 50s again with some rain and possibility of snow again. But you know, spring is coming. It's really close, and there's stuff that needs to be happening in your garden if you live in zones 5 and 6. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, if you happen to not know what zone you live in, down in the description below, there's a link that will take you out to our website. That will hook you up with the appropriate governmental agency. You can put in your postal code, and it will tell you what gardening zone you live in, okay? So for those of you that live in zones 5 and 6, we're going to be looking at last frost dates somewhere usually between about May 1st and May 15th. Somewhere around there is probably when you're going to be seeing those last frost dates for those zones. So that means it's time for us to really start thinking seriously about getting seedlings planted indoors so that they're ready to go out here in the next 8 to 10 weeks out into the garden. So there's lots of stuff that we can be doing. And then on top of planting, which we'll go through the list of planting, there's a lot of other things that you really should be doing, especially early in March. It's time to start pruning fruit trees. It's time to start pruning raspberries, blueberries, blackberries. All of those kind of things need to be pruned and ready to go. If you're planning on bringing compost into your garden, you need to start thinking about that and making arrangements for it to be delivered. Your garden may not be dried out enough or uncovered from snow enough to actually do that work, but it's time to start kind of getting all of those things on your radar, okay? So especially, those of you in zones 5, towards the end of March, you're going to be doing that pruning work. Zone 6, middle of March is probably when you're going to be doing a lot of your pruning work. So make sure you get that on your radar as well, okay? All right, so let's talk about things that you can actually be planting in your garden. And for zone 6, we're talking probably middle of March. For zones 5, we're talking the end of March that you're going to be doing most of these. And remember, for cool season crops, you're going to be starting them indoors about 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost, so that they're ready to go out around 4 to 6 weeks before that last frost. For your warm season crops, you're going to be starting them indoors about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost, so that they're ready to go out when that last frost arrives. So we may not be dealing with many warm season crops yet in zones 5 and 6. Possibly in zone 6, towards the end of the month, you might be thinking about planting some tomatoes and cucumbers, or I'm sorry, tomatoes and peppers. But lots of cool season stuff needs to be happening in your seed starting setup this month. Okay, so let's talk about it. Seeds that you can start indoors in March, zones 5 and 6. Cabbage, broccoli, kale, kohlrabi, collards, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, all of those can be planted indoors in March, so that when things warm up enough that we move into the cool season, 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost, you can then take those out and put them in the garden. All of those crops, remember, are frost hardy and should be able to handle any frost that gets thrown at them later in the year. They're not like super freeze hardy, but if we're talking, just some minor frosts and temperatures down back into the 30s or high 20s, shouldn't have any problem with that. So it's time to start getting those guys started indoors this month, okay? Also, most of your leafy greens, if you're interested in starting any of those indoors, you don't have to. Most of those can be planted out in the garden later. But if you want to get an early start on those, you could also be planting things like lettuce, spinach, Swiss chard, Chinese cabbages, kale. All of those could be planted indoors, and then they would go out in 4 to 6 weeks out into your garden, okay? Especially that's the case if you've got some protection, like a cold frame or a hoop house. They would love to be planted indoors now and transplanted out in a few weeks, and they'll do really, really well for some early harvest for you, okay? All right, now, once the snow clears and your soil dries out a little bit, there actually are a few things that you could be planting outdoors as well. And this is mostly for those of us in zones 5. This is mostly for those of us in zone 6. Those of you in zone 5 probably are going to be pushing these types of plants being planted outdoors into April. But for those of us in Zone 6, you can probably be getting your peas in sometime during the month of March. Your onion and leek seedlings will need to be transplanted out into the garden towards the end of March. My target date for my area is about March 25th. That's when I try to get my seedlings, my onion seedlings out. And again, it kind of depends on what conditions are like, whether it's been snowing recently and how, has your garden dried out, things like that. But it's time to think about that. And then if you really want to get adventurous, you can get some of the other cool season crops planted. Things like root crops. You could be planting beets, turnips, radishes, and carrots outside. Leafy greens, you could be planting, lettuce, spinach, Swiss chard, all of those outdoors as well. And this is strictly for Zone 6. If you've got something like a cold frame or a hoop house, you actually could get a few potatoes planted during the month of March. I usually plant here in Zone 6B, I usually plant some potatoes on St. Patrick's Day in a cold frame, and they'll do pretty well for 4 to 6 weeks, and then by the time they're ready to really kind of bust out of the cold frame, most of the threat of frost is gone, and it gets me a really extra early harvest of potatoes. So lots and lots of stuff. And some of this, you're being a little adventurous, planting them really early. Most of the things that I plant outside in the garden, seeds that I plant outside in the garden, are going to be towards the end of March in Zone 6, which means those of you in Zone 5 are probably more towards the 1st of April, middle of April, before you're going to be doing that. But Zone 6 especially, you can actually get out and get some things planted. When you do plant things outdoors this time of year, this early, there's a chance that your weather will cool back down. You might get some snow and things like that. And so I always try to overseed. So I put in more seeds than I think I'm really going to need, because you may lose some seeds to rot. And so you want to make sure that there's plenty of seeds there to keep your germination rates up. And if they all happen to germinate, that's fine. You can thin. But I kind of usually will overseed my lettuce, my radishes, my beets, my everything when I'm planting this early, just in case they sit for a while and some of them might get lost to rot. So keep that in mind. Okay, all right, so that, my friends, is your March planting guides for Zones 5 and 6. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. I love responding to comments, and I do that personally. That's me responding, not like some paid assistant or anything. That's me responding when I'm responding. So any questions you have, please leave those down below. Make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel, and when you do that, click the notification bell, because that will let you know every time I post a new video. And we will be posting these growing guide videos every month for the year 2020, and then we're putting those all in a playlist so that you guys have those available, year after year, things that you can be planning in the different months of the year. So those will all be available to you, and we'll continue to do these every month. So hope you guys enjoy this. Everybody have a great week. Get out in the garden. Weather's starting to warm up. Things are happening. So get the garden in your mind again and make it happen. Okay? Happy gardening, guys.